In some cases, the lab manual suggests exactly what you're supposed to record in your notebook, such as the temperature or the color of a particular material. Sometimes it just says record your observations. It's important that you're looking for the things that a chemist would look for. Don't write things like nothing. That's very vague. All that tells us is that you haven't observed anything unusual, but it doesn't tell us what you have observed. When you're observing a liquid, you want to indicate the color and whether it is clear, cloudy, or opaque. There is a difference between clarity and color, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. If you have solids, you might want to notice if they're powdery or crystalline. You might want to take note of the color or if they look metallic. You might want to notice whether or not that they dissolve in water if that's part of the procedure that you are doing. And then if you have a gas, as you might have with your elements at the beginning, you might want to notice if the gas has a color and if that gas, which is probably in a balloon, floats or doesn't float. And what does that tell you about the relative density compared with air? So these are the kinds of observations you want to make sure that you have in your notebook. Among your observations, you're going to determine whether your material is clear versus cloudy and whether or not it has a color. Now, these terms, when we use them in everyday life, sometimes get mixed together, but it's important that we distinguish them in chemistry because they tell us some important things about our liquid that we're looking at. Make sure that you look at the liquid when it's in the test tube and not in the bottle. The bottles themselves are not quite clear, and so you may not be able to observe all of the properties very well unless it's in the test tube. First, let's look at color. These two test tubes contain liquids that are different colors. One is purple and one is colorless. Now they're both clear. The one that is colorless might be the one you think of as being clear, but clear just tells us that we can see through it and there's nothing getting in the way of that. There's no cloudiness. So I'm holding this up to this blue line that appears through the test tube. We can see that those are clear. One is colored, one is colorless. Now, if I have some sort of cloudiness in there, I can also describe the extent to which it's cloudy. So, for example, this first test tube, I might be able to see the blue line through there, but I can also tell there's some cloudiness. So this is a cloudy test tube, and what that tells me is that there is a solid precipitate in there. This test tube also has a solid precipitate in it, but it might be so thick that we can't see the blue line through it. We would call that one opaque. The important thing to remember is that there is a distinction between clear and colorless. Colorless tells us whether there is a color there or not. Clear tells us whether there is a solid there or not.